Welcome back. It's Amy Rose here at the Digital Economy Council of Australia for the Global Digital Asset Regulatory Summit. We're into our second session. We are heading over to the US, and it is an absolute privilege and a pleasure to welcome to the stage Sumeera Younis from the US Securities and Exchange Commission, who will be joined by Ashima Chaudhary from Mastercard. Together, they're going to unpack how the world's largest capital market is navigating digital assets. Let's bring them to the stage.
Thanks, Amy Rose. Hi, Sumeera. Welcome to a session.
Ashima, thank you.
Yeah. Really looking forward to this chat. So why don't we just start with you, Sumeera? First of all, you've been working in this space for over 7 years, and in crypto years, it's a lifetime. So we'd just love to learn about your journey. Also, a little bit more around your role in the SEC Crypto Task Force. And, if you can just help set the stage for us in terms of the role of the task force and the mandate within the broader SEC jurisdiction.
Great. Thank you, Ashima. And before I begin, I will give the standard SEC disclaimer. My views are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission, the commissioners, or the staff. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation today. I was at the SEC in 2017 when we first heard of crypto kind of in my office, specifically when funds started to express an interest in wanting to invest in this thing called Bitcoin. I'm sorry about the echo. I see that comment. Should we give it a second and folks can let us know if the audio is still a problem, but we flagged that. So when in 2017 we first heard from funds who wanted to invest in Bitcoin, I saw the filing and I kind of raised my hand because nobody was like, what is this thing called Bitcoin? And I was familiar with it and I was familiar with blockchain technology. And so by virtue of having that basic understanding, I got involved in the work. And since then, I've been working on crypto issues at the SEC. And over the past administration, we didn't have as much leeway to be able to work in this space or to do policy around it. And so starting in January of this year, we were able to start to form a path for crypto. And I've been lucky enough to be on the crypto task force, which was stood up to basically provide a regulatory framework for crypto. And my role on the crypto task force is chief of operations, but all of us really just roll up our sleeves and work and get whatever needs to get done. And we focus on the areas that need attention. And so it's been a real team effort. And within the SEC might be a little bit different than how different jurisdictions look at the financial markets, right? In some jurisdictions, like banking issues might be under the purview of the securities regulator. Here, the Securities and Exchange Commission really just looks at securities. So we need that jurisdictional hook to work on an issue. So commodity, spot market stuff is generally with the CFTC, banking things are with OCC, FDIC, and other banking regulators, and the security stuff falls under our jurisdiction.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Sumeera. You mentioned you've got the focus area, so why don't we just start by learning a little bit more around the strategic priorities for the task force and the operations, and then how do you manage the dual mandate of protecting the investors as well as driving and enabling innovation, and especially in space like crypto, which is moving so fast?
Sure. Thanks for that question. So in terms of how the Crypto Task Force sets up its priorities, initially when we first started thinking about what a task force might look like and what we should focus on, we really took a step back and thought if we want to really address the issues and the questions that we've been hearing, kind of informally so far, how should we approach it? And the first thing we realized was that we really needed to talk to our buildings, so talk to the subject matter experts within the SEC, but also talk to the industry and the public and hear from them in terms of what were the roadblocks, what was preventing innovation. And of course, for a while, we're really in an enforcement heavy era in America around crypto. So the previous administration really had their head in the sand, as Chair Atkins likes to say, in terms of acknowledging that crypto did need a regulatory regime that address some of the special aspects of this new asset class. And so we wanted to really educate ourselves in where the questions were, and we knew that would require engagement with the public. So that was one of our first priorities. And we also knew that there was a lot of questions around the taxonomy, like what is a security in the first place? Because until we defined that or found the answer to that question, you can't start looking at like the trading venue questions or the broker dealer questions or investment advisors, investment companies holding different assets. So it was really an information gathering stage that we started off from. And then from there, we were able to kind of articulate a framework, which now we've been able to publicly share. And Chair Atkins' Project Crypto speech, he really outlined some of the priorities that the task force is going to be taking on. And they touch every aspect of our building because the crypto ecosystem, it really does follow the life cycle of a security. And that means basically all the policy divisions in this building have become activated to answer questions and to assess whether we need new rules to address, how crypto assets will interact with our markets, or if we need guidance or we just need to provide clarity, like the answers are already in the current rule book. This is how we would expect to see them applied. So that's kind of where we are right now. And then you had also asked about how we balance this investor protection and innovation. And I think that's, a really, really good question. And it's front of mind for us on the task force and everything that we do. I think there's all sorts of like discourse around crypto, right? Like that's this Wild West and the people who are in it want to just like not be regulated in any way. And the SEC is just going to create like this red carpet for crypto industry, do whatever we want and whatever they want. And it feels, like the crypto task force, I think collectively we have well over 100 years of securities experience. It's made up of longstanding securities lawyers. Most of us have been with the commission, for 10 plus years. So it's real, securities lawyers looking at these issues. And I mean, if you worked at a regulator, you just inherently are always thinking about investor protection and market protection. It's kind of in your blood. And that's kind of what draws people to this work in the first place. So on the task force, we are constantly thinking about that, but then you balance that with what is best for America, what is best for like our future, and what products do we want to enable. And one of the things is innovation is the lifeblood of any country, right? We're on a video, right? We're having a conference with you in Australia and me in America, right? This wasn't always possible. We drive on roads that were built to support cars. So over the decades, like technological innovations have restructured how we live our lives. And I think there are folks that think that blockchain technology and crypto will enable a different way of the financial systems running. And that may be true or that may not be true. But the regulator's job is not to make that determination, right? You need to allow the markets to have enough space to be able to experiment and to see and test out these ideas. And our mandate is to take what Congress has told us, like the parameters that it has told us to act within, and make sure that innovation happens within those parameters. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Sumeera. Now, leaning further into information gathering that you mentioned earlier, are you able to share more about the Spring Towards Crypto Clarity Roundtables, like the public engagement on digital asset that you ran? What were the objectives for it, and then what were some of the key outcomes that came from it, and how's that feedback been leveraged?
Great, thank you. So when we were kind of stepping back and thinking of how we were going to approach the crypto task force, one of the things we realized was that like industry trust and engagement with our building, with our agency, was probably like at an all-time low. And especially for as long as I've been at the agency, I know that we took a major like reputational hit with crypto because we just weren't, I think, engaging in good faith. And so one of the things for me is funny because I led a lot of these roundtables. And in the prep calls I would have with all of the panelists, the first thing I would say is I think like roundtables are the biggest waste of time. And, we spend so much energy and time around them to what end, right? But I think we had a few goals with them, and I think they're realized. One of them was to rebuild trust, to let folks know that they can come back into this building that so many people had avoided for a long time, and to show that like we were really in listening mode. We weren't trying to guide specifically what was discussed at these roundtables. I was very clear to the folks that participated, like we don't have agenda, so to say, for these roundtables, other than hearing about these specific topics. And so the roundtables were designed around topics that we thought we would first need to address to come up with a regulatory framework. And so I think we're really successful in, opening that door back up. We've had amazing engagement from the industry and the public, academics, critics of ours as well. We're not just wanting to be in some sort of echo chamber where people are like, good job, everything you're doing is awesome. We are thankful for the voices that interrogate the work, the statements that we put out, and really engage with us in good faith. And I think so all of those really positive outcomes, I think, did result from the roundtables. The learning has been ongoing. So the roundtables are recorded and they're available. I know people, even on the outside, are still watching some of them if they hadn't had an opportunity to see them when we first did the roundtables, but also in this building, as now we are implementing some of the rulemaking agenda that the chair has outlined. They're looking at like the custody roundtable. They're looking at the trading markets roundtable, the teams that are working on rules that are adjacent to that, and seeing what the industry said. Along with the folks that came to the roundtables, a lot of the panelists submitted written input, which is available on the Crypto Task Force website. And that has informed our work a lot. It's one thing for people to talk in an interactive way, but when they kind of outline their ideas and their arguments in these papers and different written submissions that were provided to the task force, that has been really instructive in our thinking and our policymaking work. And I think also importantly, it has led to discourse outside of this building, right? Because people are interacting in industry with each other because of what people have done, put through on the written input page. So I think it's led, just to better outcomes. We're going to have more informed policy making because of both the public conversations and then the written input that came with it.
Well, it's great to hear how you're really taking in the feedback and really incorporating that into policy making. Now, moving on to doing some of these things. So when you're working in such an innovative space, it takes a village to move any small thing forward. So how is the task force collaborating with other institutions, and why is this collaboration important?
I mean, yeah, anyone who's worked in, I think, any sort of really anything, but particularly in finance and in the securities world, there's so much intersection. When I first got involved in crypto work, as in any agency or organization, there can tend to be silos. And when different groups don't talk to each other, there's a lot of risks, right, embedded in that lack of communication. And so before the task force was stood up and I was on staff, I would work really hard to talk to the other divisions to make sure that we weren't having, this is like a multi-thousand person agency. So even though it seems like, one hand should know what the other hand is doing, it becomes difficult in a large organization to always make sure that communication is happening. So we work hard within the agency to make sure the divisions were talking. When the FinHub was stood up, it became a good vehicle through which we could all communicate and had a place to meet, basically, to share what different offices and divisions in this building were doing. And so when the Crypto Task Force was stood up and we started to look at the issues that we would need to address, we took a similar approach in terms of making sure the building is communicating as best as it can. And this is like a work in progress. Always, it's something we can always improve on, but we really try to engage the different divisions. Like the task force is 15 people or so. There's no way that we can, just within ourselves, like carry out this really significant mandate. So many hands have been involved in the work and the guidance that has been put out and in the different initiatives that we've taken. If you ever are bored and take a look at the Crypto Task Force webpage, you can see, all the different things that have been happening within the agency around crypto and it's really significant. So that's just within our agency. But then if you're working in the crypto space, you know that there are like significant issues that are outside of our jurisdiction, like the stable coins, for example. It's a payment rail in one regard, but otherwise maybe it's going to be, CFTC, I think, just noted that stable coins, I might be misspeaking on this, but I think this is correct, can be used as a collateral. Will that, happen at the SEC? Will there be engagement with that? But then we're going to be working with other folks, tax implications, right? IRS is looking at how it's going to be treating crypto. So, and Treasury is looking at other elements. So the different agencies across the government are all looking at issues that have, like the Venn diagrams, right, have some overlap, and we want to make sure that as a country we're cohesive in our crypto approach, right? You don't want, first of all, there needs to be some level of harmonization and consistency and not duplicative reporting. So we're trying, to make sure that these doors are really open, having strong relationship with our sister agencies and communicating with them on a regular basis. And just on Monday of next week, we're going to be hosting a CFTC SEC roundtable. And I think these two agencies are going to have to work hand in hand in terms of rolling out any sort of crypto regime. And I'm glad to see that this partnership, I think, will be strong. And there's been such a good appetite on both sides to work together and to work in collaboration. And I think the roundtable will signify kind of that step being taken in a really concrete fashion. They put out a statement, the SEC CFTC joint statement went out too. Just, I think there's different signals to show that these two agencies will be working closely together, but just across U.S. regulators, we're working hard to make sure we're collaborating well together.
No, that's great to hear, Sumeera, because I think collaboration like this is what leads to clarity, and clarity is the main thing that's required to drive innovation. Like that's what the builders, the investors, and the creators in this space need. Now, staying on the topic of collaboration and leaning a little bit more around the cross-jurisdictional collaboration. So we all know crypto by nature is borderless. That's the genesis of Bitcoin completely. And effective regulation cannot be contained by national borders alone. And obviously, you're leading the work on the international, in the task force, you're leading the work on the international crypto space. Are you able to share more around what's happening there and how you're thinking about cross-jurisdictional collaboration and any key priorities or outcomes in that space?
Sure. Yeah. Just, really the same themes as in my previous answer. Like you said, crypto is a borderless technology. We can't not acknowledge that, and policymaking has to reflect that reality. And so as we were working in this building on different issues, there's a couple of things at play. First of all, under the previous administration, we're really stifled in what we were able to do. So in a way, we're behind, right? Because European and UK regulators have had, and many others across the world have, Japan, Singapore, India, all sorts of different jurisdictions have taken approaches to like putting out sandboxes, putting out guidance, putting out some sort of registration regime. So we see a great mix of that. And I was definitely aware of that as I was working with our team here on coming up with a framework. And I was very curious to see what lessons have been learned, right? Like it sucks that we're behind, but there's also a value in it, which is we can learn from other folks' mistakes or missteps or the things that worked well for them. And so I, kind of reached out to the leadership here and said, what should we start having some of these conversations? And everyone is definitely on the same page that we should be engaging with our counterparts in different jurisdictions. And we've been reaching out and having those conversations, and they've been very instructive in terms of a more formal like pathway forward. President Trump, on his recent trip to London, outlined that there would be a new task force, like a transatlantic task force that would be stood up to kind of contemplate this. Chair Atkins has also echoed that he wants to see cross-border cooperation in crypto. So I think the appetite from the administration and leadership at the agency is definitely there. And we're starting those conversations and figuring out what, good partnership could look like, or where we can find opportunities to really put like less strain on our builders here in America and for other jurisdictions as well. And how can American investors have access to opportunities that might not be available if we're not thinking about the cross-border angle?
Okay, now great to hear. Sumeera, now thinking more about innovation. So we are at this stage where tokenization obviously is one of the examples of those innovation, and tokenization of traditional assets is moving from concept to implementation, and particularly in the institutional use cases, we are seeing exploration of tokenized treasuries, tokenized bank deposits, settlement instruments. As an example, at Mastercard, we are exploring this through a multi-token network, and we recently partnered with Ondo Finance to bring on those short-term US government treasury funds to the multi-token network. Now, this allows businesses to integrate these tokenized treasuries into their operations. So that's just one example. So from your vantage point at the SEC, how are you thinking about frameworks for tokenized traditional assets? And are there any use cases that you've heard through public feedback that are front of mind?
Yeah, I think tokenization is, like, just for me personally, a really interesting place. One of the first things that I worked on here at the SEC was like tokenized fund shares. And so we saw tokenized closed-end fund shares, tokenized mutual fund shares. And that was kind of a use case that we saw early on and has been, in the market now for years. And I think it's been a successfully deployed use case. We hear like really the full kind of spectrum of use cases. There's like fractional ownership of shares that's being done, but like tokenization can make that maybe more streamlined. We hear about reduction of reliance on intermediaries and how that can also remove certain frictions from the system or like the financial transaction. We hear about quicker settlement times. We've all heard about, right, atomic settlement, more transparency if things are on chain in some cases. And for me, I think this has not been realized, but I'm curious and excited to see where this will go, is like how this will lower the barrier of entry to the markets for investors, right? Like we see young investors who are now investing in crypto at a higher rate than they would in traditional equities. So when we marry that technology with traditional equities, will that, open up a capital for our companies in this country? So I think it'll be really interesting to see if it does lower the barrier to entry and we see more engagement in the markets, but also how can we use like tokenized shares to give investors information in a more accessible way? Here in America, we have this disclosure framework. So there's these prospectuses that can be like 1,000 pages long if they're covering a bunch of funds. And so for the average investor to look at just a file of that size and try to navigate it and understand how it relates to them, I think that's really challenging. I worked in disclosure for most of my career, and I've read these documents, day in and day out, and edited them and reviewed them. And still, I struggle sometimes to understand how the risks really apply to a certain investor for a certain fund, right? Sometimes they'll just see 20, 30 risk disclosures, and one of them might actually be very significant and could make me lose all my money. But because I'm looking at, tens or dozens of pages of just risk disclosure, it's difficult, right, for an investor to appreciate in the current disclosure regime. So I think this is an area where we might see like tokenized shares being attached to interactive disclosures, or there's just more like technological opportunity to make information layered and accessible. So that's not like probably the most talked about use case, but for me personally, it's really interesting and exciting.
That's great to hear. Very excited space, Sumeera. I'm mindful of time as well. So I think we'll probably move towards closing. We are right in the middle of this huge change. There's regulatory frameworks evolving, obviously more clarity expected as well, all around the world. Innovation is moving really fast. What are you most excited about, and what are you most optimistic about in terms of the future of digital assets and where US is heading in this space?
Well, I'm definitely super optimistic and super excited about it all, just in the sense that when people can build, we don't know, right? We've seen some of the use cases that we've talked about, but I also think there's an opportunity to really improve our financial markets and improve the investor experience. And for me, for someone who's been a lawyer in securities law and been finance adjacent my whole career, I didn't start investing until I was in my 30s, which seems crazy to me now. And I like the idea of like, what is the difference when somebody who's a 12-year-old or 14-year-old or 18-year-old starts their investment journey? What does that mean for their future and their children's future? And I think for me, that's really exciting. And I think this is going to be a pathway to get more young people into investments and make it easier and accessible and hopefully cheaper too. So I think all of that is very exciting.
Very exciting. Thank you so much for joining us, Sumeera. Really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much both for joining us. We are running a little over, but I didn't want to stop it. I was so thrilled to hear the conversation. We will chat a little bit further after the event, Sumeera. It's a pleasure to engage the SEC in our second iteration of the Global Digital Asset Regulatory Summit. And thank you, Ashima.